Have you ever wondered what secrets linger in the ICU at night, when the patients are unconscious and the halls fall silent? What if the monitors beeping softly in the dark weren't only tracking the living? In the stillness of the ICU, life and death meet, and something else waits in the shadows. The ICU is not just a place where lives are saved, it's a liminal space, a battleground between existence and the void. For those of us who work the night shift, the air grows heavy as the hours tick by. Sleep-deprived minds may brush off the unexplainable as exhaustion, but I learned the hard way that some things cannot be rationalized. This story isn't just about what I saw, it's about what I felt, what I feared, and what still haunts me long after I left those sterile, dimly lit corridors. It was my first week working nights in the ICU. The hospital was old, with creaky elevators and walls that seemed to absorb the sorrow and suffering they'd witnessed. The other nurses warned me about the peculiarities of the night shift, but they always laughed it off. "It's just the building playing tricks on you," they'd say. "Nothing to be scared of." But I felt it immediately, a suffocating sense of being watched. That first night, I was assigned room 6, where an elderly patient named Mrs. Grant was recovering from surgery. She was stable but quiet, her sunken eyes flicking to the ceiling as though she saw something I couldn't. Around 2 a.m., her heart monitor began to beep erratically. I rushed in, expecting to find her in distress. Instead, she was sitting upright, her frail body trembling. "What's wrong, Mrs. Grant?" I asked, trying to steady my voice. She didn't answer right away. Her gaze shifted to the corner of the room, where the shadows seemed unnaturally dark. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "He's here." "Who?" "The man in black," she muttered, her voice quaking. "He's waiting for me." Chills ran down my spine. I glanced at the corner but saw nothing. I reassured her, adjusted her pillows and left the room, telling myself she was hallucinating. But when I checked her chart, I noticed something odd. This wasn't the first time she'd mentioned the man in black. Room 12 was known among the staff as the cold room. Even on warm nights, the air inside was frigid, and no one could explain why. It became a running joke among the nurses, but I quickly learned there was nothing funny about it. One night, I was charting near the nurses' station when I heard a faint knock. It wasn't from the door, but from within the wall itself. I froze, listening. Knock, knock, knock. Curious and a little unnerved, I walked to room 12. It was empty. The patient had been discharged earlier that evening. Yet, as I stepped inside, the temperature dropped sharply, and my breath came out in visible puffs. The knocking stopped, replaced by a faint rhythmic sound, like the tapping of fingernails on glass. My heart pounded as I scanned the room, looking for the source. Then I saw it. The reflection of a figure in the window, standing directly behind me. I spun around, but the room was empty. The next morning, I learned that a nurse had died in that room years ago. She'd been found slumped against the window, her fingernails broken and bloodied. One of the strangest and most terrifying experiences happened with a patient named Mr. Harlow. He'd been admitted for a stroke and was nonverbal, unable to move or communicate. Late one night, as I was making my rounds, I entered his room to check his vitals. The lights were dimmed, and the only sound was the soft beeping of his heart monitor. "Help me," a voice whispered. I froze, staring at Mr. Harlow. His eyes were open, wide with terror, but his lips hadn't moved. "Help me!" the voice came again, louder this time. I backed away, my hands trembling. The voice wasn't his. It was raspy, almost inhuman, and it seemed to echo from the walls themselves. I ran out of the room, leaving the door ajar. From the hallway I could hear whispers, low, guttural, unintelligible words. When I returned with another nurse, the room was silent, and Mr. Harlow's heart monitor showed a flat line. He was gone. The call button is a lifeline in the ICU, used by patients to summon help. But in my experience, it wasn't always the living who pressed it. One particularly quiet night, the call light for room 9 blinked on the monitor. I frowned. Room 9 had been empty for days. Thinking it was a technical glitch, I walked to the room to reset the button. But as I entered, the air felt oppressive, heavy with an unnatural stillness. The bed was made, the machines unplugged, yet the call button dangled from the bedside as if someone had just used it. "Hello?" I called, my voice barely audible. The button fell to the floor, swinging slightly, as if an unseen hand had dropped it. Then the monitor on the wall flickered to life, showing a flat line and a date, March 3rd, 1987. Confused and terrified, I later discovered that a patient had died in that room on March 3rd, 1987. The call button had malfunctioned during his final moments, leaving him unable to summon help. By the end of my tenure in the ICU, I'd grown accustomed to the strange happenings, or so I thought. But my last night on the job proved to be the most terrifying of all. Around 3:15 a.m., the power flickered, and the entire unit plunged into darkness. The backup generators kicked in moments later, but the dim emergency lights cast eerie shadows across the hallways. As I walked past room 6, I heard faint sobbing. I stopped, peering inside. Mrs. Grant was long gone, but her bed was occupied by a figure with long, dark hair obscuring their face. "Ma'am, are you okay?" I asked, my voice trembling. The figure didn't respond. Slowly it turned its head toward me, revealing hollow eye sockets and a twisted, gaping mouth. I stumbled back, my screams catching in my throat. The lights flickered again, and when they came back on, the figure was gone. But the sobbing continued, echoing down the hallway as if the building itself was crying. The ICU is a place of healing, but it is also a place of profound loss. The experiences I had there left an indelible mark on me, a reminder that not everything can be explained by science or reason. If you ever find yourself working the night shift in an old hospital, remember this: some patients never leave, and some stories are never truly over.